Robert Snow was once the captain of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department and was in charge of the Department of Homicide and Robbery and the Department of Organized Crime, and has written numerous books on police work. One day Robert underwent hypnotic regression as a dare to prove that reincarnation was not true, but what he discovered surprised and unsettled him. It began when he was at a party and a police psychologist told him that she did past life regressions as a hobby. She said that her client was initially made to relax in order for past life memories to come through. Captain Snow suggested to the psychologist that the memories were probably fabricated, but in order to prove him wrong, she offered to regress him. Snow initially agreed to take part, but the psychologist had a hard time trying to get Snow to take part in a session, and even suggested he was scared. Although reluctant, he agreed to be regressed, but went to a different therapist. The whole time not believing in reincarnation and did not expect anything to happen during the session. The regression therapist was a woman called Dr. Mary Ellen Griffith, and she started this session by asking him to picture his higher self coming to greet him and what he was wearing. Snow said, "How the hell would I know?" But he decided to give it a try. He said, "A long white gown. Isn't that what all spirits wore?" She said, "Your higher self is standing there and asking if you're ready to go on a journey. It is telling you that it will guide you and protect you on your journey." Snow thought, "I can't believe I'm doing this." But during the regression, Snow started to experience clear past life memories, and the past life events were more clear than waking consciousness. He was able to recall many different lifetimes, but the one that stood out was that of a portrait painter looked to be from the 19th century, as Snow remembered numerous specific details about that particular lifetime as an artist, where he is painting a portrait of a hunchback woman, and remembered the experience. He remembered the paint strokes that were used to create the painting, and why someone with a pronounced deformity would want that portrait painted. More aspects of the regression came through other than the portrait of the hunchback woman. He found that he painted portraits to make money, but hated painting portraits. He used the name Jack and had a walking stick. He and his wife spent some time in France, and his wife was unable to bear any children. He obviously did not make much money from painting, as they were always desperate for money, and they would argue about it, though they had a happy marriage. He worked in a studio that had a skylight and a row of windows, but had once stayed on an estate with large gardens. His wife had died from a blood clot, and he himself had died in autumn 1917 of a heart attack in the large city surrounded by tall buildings. After the session, Snow was less skeptical about reincarnation, which had obviously had a major effect on him, and he went in search of further proof to see whether his experience was authentic. However, there was still some doubt, and figured he must have previously learned about the portrait painter from a book, either at school or in a museum, and the regression was a result of a forgotten memory. Nevertheless, Snow went in search of evidence, as if he was dealing with a police case, where he methodically examined art books, visited various art galleries, and met with art dealers. He specifically went in search of the portrait of the hunchback woman that he'd seen whilst under regression. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to find an historical artist that fitted the artist in his regression. Even though Snow had had a lot of experience as a researcher, having written 6 books on police management, after a year of trying to find the portrait of the hunchback woman, he came to a dead end and came to the conclusion that he would not be able to identify the artist that he'd seen whilst being regressed. It was a short time after his failed research that his wife Melanie suggested they have a holiday in New Orleans to celebrate their wedding anniversary, and it was on the last day of their vacation when Snow wandered into an art gallery in the French Quarter of New Orleans. It was in this gallery that Snow would undergo another profound episode. Hanging on the wall of the gallery was the portrait of the hunchback woman that he'd seen in his regression, where Snow proceeded to whirl around and then stared open-mouthed at the portrait in front of him. He was frozen in his tracks, and it felt like a huge voltage surging through his body. Had he somehow been guided to the gallery by some spiritual source rather than by mere chance? For several minutes, Snow just stood gazing at the portrait and then closed his eyes and pictured the scene where he is painting this very painting in his studio, and then opening his eyes to see the actual finished portrait. Everything appeared surreal, and he felt he was in a vivid dream where he was waking up covered in sweat. He kept telling himself it is all a dream and it's not real, but at the same time was absolutely certain that it was the same painting he had seen while under hypnosis. Yet stumbling onto it by accident like this was simply too weird to be true, because things like this just didn't happen in real life. After all the months of thorough searching, would he perchance come upon the painting like this? How could it be that his wife Melanie would just happen to want to go to New Orleans, and that they would just happen to visit this gallery just when they happened to have this painting for sale? During his years as a police officer, he had always searched for the truth, which on many occasions didn't turn out to be what he'd expected. But here he was, having to face the truth that he'd been looking for, while at the same time trying to find any way to deny what he'd found, believing that paranormal things didn't happen to real people. After making inquiries, he found that the portrait was painted by a man called J. Carroll Beckwith. Still not believing what was happening to him, he figured he had once seen the portrait of the hunchback woman at a museum or at an exhibition. To seek further clarification, he asked the gallery worker if this was possible, but was told no, you would not have seen this work because it had been in private hands for many years, and there had not been an exhibition of Beckwith's work in the last 75 years, and he wasn't that famous. So did Captain Snow really find the portrait by chance, or did a spiritual message somehow get sent to his wife Melanie to go to New Orleans? After further research, Snow found that Beckwith's last exhibition was in 1911, long before Snow was born. Although reluctant to accept reincarnation as the basis of his regression experience, he had to accept the fact that there had been a J. Carroll Beckwith, that if this were a police case, the evidence he compiled would stand up in court. Snow said that as a police officer, he has been shot at and people have also tried to stab him, but nothing compares to how unnerved he felt when he discovered he had lived a past life or lives. Captain Snow has written a book called Looking for Carroll Beckwith, Portrait of a Past Life Detective, which documents his reincarnation case in detail. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. In many religions, reincarnation is a belief that when you pass away, your soul enters a new body. Another religious belief is that you could be reincarnated into literally anything, from a grasshopper, tree, or even a cow. But most who believe in reincarnation say that we are most likely reincarnated as people over and over again. Of course, these are only theories, as no one can know for sure. However, some suggest there are ways to tell if you have been reincarnated, and today we'll be exploring 5 signs you have been reincarnated. Number 5. Dreams. Normally we dream of things that reflect our everyday lives. That's if you can make sense of them. You may be surprised to hear that if you dream of a stranger's face, you may have passed them in your waking life. It's this fact that makes us ask the question, what if you have recurring dreams of unfamiliar people? Dreams may be a sign of past life memories coming back. To find out if your dreams are the key to you being reincarnated, you should ask yourself these 3 questions. Number 1, do your dreams appear to be in a particular period in history? 2, do you ever dream of dying in a certain way? 3, do you have the same dream over and over again? These may be a sign that your soul is recalling memories from your past lives. Number 4, scars and wounds. Physical defects can sometimes be carried over from a previous life. The late psychiatrist Ian Stevenson from the University of Virginia conducted more than 2,500 case studies of supposed reincarnation over a duration of 40 years and published 12 books on the subject. During his findings, Stevenson recorded that 35% of the cases studied had either birthmarks or birth defects. He stated the subject's marks or defects corresponded to injuries or illness experienced in their previous life, and medical documents have confirmed this in more than 40 cases. One intriguing case was from a child in Turkey who had remembered his previous life as a man who had been killed by a shotgun. Hospital records told of a man who had died 6 days after being shot by a blast to the right side of the skull. The young boy had been born with a malformed right ear known as unilateral microtia, along with the right side of his face being underdeveloped. These birthmarks can differ from minor to major scars and may be a sign of your past life. Number 3, deja vu. We've all had a case of deja vu at some point in our lives, but some of us experience more deja vu than others. This could be a sign that you've been somewhere before, or even met someone you felt you've known for a lifetime. You could be experiencing some past memories deep within your subconscious that may stem from a past life. Strangely, some people have even known older people's names and their background even though they've never met them before. Dr. Brian Weiss, a past life regression healer, has stated that many patients have felt unexplainable emotions while visiting certain countries or seeing certain people. Not only do they feel a sense of having been there before, but they also feel very familiar with their surroundings. Weiss has even been able to trace back their past lives using hypnotherapy and has helped people find some connections to their feelings of deja vu. Number 2, natural gifts. Some children or even adults appear to have amazing talent without learning or studying them. This can be a major clue that you've had a past life. Astonishingly, some people have been able to speak other languages fluently with no lessons whatsoever. Sure, you can say that certain talents run in the family genetically. However, there have been many cases of people displaying extraordinary talents that have no explanation. Now, the indication of a past life can sometimes be manifested in a strong interest in a certain topic, for example, a certain period in history. Number 1, phobias. Phobias can be quite difficult to overcome and can be very debilitating. However, in some circumstances, phobias appear to come out of the blue. What if you could trace them back to a certain event in a past life? Whether it's a fear of heights, small spaces, or spiders, phobias are built into us as a part of our survival instinct. But how do we explain a fear that has never and will never be a threat to us? Certain past life regression therapists have often traced phobias back to certain events in past lives. One example includes having drowned in a past life and then having a fear of water. Joe Keaton was born in 1920 in Derbyshire in the East Midlands of England. Keaton discovered his hypnotic abilities when very young, though he did not take them seriously until many years later. Over a period of 25 years, he had conducted 8,000 regressions. Joe Keaton passed away in 2003. The following hypnosis regression session took place between Joe Keaton and 60-year-old craft teacher by the name of Francis Isaacson. Whilst under hypnosis, Francis was asked the obvious first question, "Who are you?" And she replied, "Margaret." She was then asked how old she was and what year it was. She said she was 11 years old and the year was 1811. After further discussions, Joe found that the family's name was Benson, and so the child's full name was Margaret Benson. She said that her mother was deceased and her father was a merchant who sold dishes, pots, pans and yardage. Yardage is an old expression that is not used much today, and in this case it meant yardage material. After the session, Frances said she had never heard of the word in her life, but it was casually mentioned by young Margaret Benson. Margaret said that she lived in Grosvenor Square, Concord, New Hampshire, United States. She said she had a friend called Lucia McDougall. Her teacher's name was Mrs. Bartholomew. She said that most of the people she was connected with were involved in farming, but she also knew a place that made shoes. Margaret was then brought forward to the age of 21, where the tone of her voice totally changed. She was asked where she was, and she replied that she was in church and was wearing a white dress as she was preparing to get married. They asked her the name of the groom, and she replied, Richard Smith, but then said spelt with a Y. They asked her whether she'd been doing anything interesting recently, and she said putting up fruit. She was asked what her husband did. Her face then took on a smug and conceited expression and said, "He is a doctor." They asked her where her husband qualified, and she replied, "Reed College. I think it's in Canada." Actually, Reed College was in Portland. From that moment on, Margaret's life took on a pattern in life that was consistent with many regressions, such as the normal, mundane and trivial activities, rather than anything exciting or traumatic. She would describe the colour of a dress, bottling fruit, as sitting in a rocking chair and dusting. Margaret was recalling many of the dreariest aspects of life that most people would have encountered. She said she had 4 children, where one had died. When they progressed Margaret's life to the age of 31, they found her life was in a bit of a rut. She now lived in Oak Lane, Concord, and had 3 children. To buy a dress would cost about $5, but her housekeeper made her dresses for her. They asked her about any news of the day. She said that many men were going west to find vacant land. She had no idea who her husband's patients were, but many of his patients came in after being kicked by their horses, as she did not help in the dispensary. Her husband calls it his laboratory. She did name some of the medicines, such as yellow-brown mixture for stomach upsets, which was probably kaolin opium, iodine for cuts, and Epsom salts for unspecified ailments. At the age of 40, they found her to be weary and sitting in a rocking chair. She would regularly sigh and appear to be disillusioned with marriage. When I asked her questions about her current life, she replied with, "Utterly weary and fed up and still in the same house." She complained of too much work, and her husband was always busy. Although she still had servants, the children made her tired. After progressing to the age of 60, her responses appeared to be livelier than at any other time in her life. They asked her what she was doing, and she said, "Dusting." They asked her whether she was in good health, and she replied that she had lost her teeth. They asked her who the president was, and she said, "Lincoln." They asked her whether she voted for him, but she said she could not vote. Women did not get the vote until 1920, but only for white women. She said he was going to free the black man, but her husband did not approve of that because there would not be enough work for them. When they progressed her to the age of 67, she said that her husband had been dead for a year, but she showed no emotion. He had been buried at the local church that had a white steeple and was located just off the Commons. When they progressed her to the final moments in her life, her voice sounded old and frail. She said she was 89, and they asked her whether she was afraid. She said she was not able to breathe, then said, "I can't let go, I can't let go." Frances' head then tilted to one side, obviously showing that Margaret had now passed away. Keaton then asked Frances to go 5 years into the future, and immediately her voice changed from a frail old woman to a childish voice. He asked her where she was now, and Frances said she was living in the United States. He asked her what her name was and how old she was. She replied the name was Randolph and he was 5, so in this life Frances was now a male. He asked where in the United States he was living, and he said Virginia, and he lived on a farm. It was a white house with a fence around it. He was asked whether he had any toys, and he said a hammer. Were there any animals around? And he said, "A big horse. He stands there and I brush him." He has progressed to the age of 15 and goes by the name of Randy, and that his surname is Nelson. He claims to have been born in 1890 and was presently attending a military college by the name of Briarcliff. He said he hates the school and the teachers and was not cut out to be a soldier. Records showed that there was a military college in Briarcliff Manor, New York, called Holbrook's Military Academy, and also known as Dr. Holbrook's Military School. At the age of 20, Randolph is back on the farm and riding a horse. Frances claimed to have no interest in horses, yet Randolph's interest in horses dominated his life and is discussed in most parts of the regression. He was asked about the farm, and he said they bred horses, hay, and grew tobacco. The tobacco was sold in Richmond. He was asked the name of the auctioneer, and he said Bressler. He was asked about any statues in Richmond. He said there was the statue of General Washington in the square. There is a statue called the Virginia Washington Monument, known locally simply as the Washington Monument. It is a 19th century neoclassical statue of George Washington located on the public square in Richmond, Virginia. Randy was progressed to the age of 27, where the year is 1917. He was asked if there was a war on, and he initially said no, but when asked again he said there was a war in Europe. America entered the war on April the 6th, 1917, and when he was brought forward 6 months, he said that he was now on a ship sailing to France. He was with the 67th Infantry, and its rank was First Lieutenant. His army number was 82003. He was asked the name of the commander, and he said Beadle. There was a Major General Biddle, who was acting Chief of Staff in 1917 to 1918 in France. Randy was brought forward another 6 months, where Frances was now slumped in the chair, and there was an expression of pain on her face, and her voice was weak. Randy is in hospital in France and was wounded in the leg. He was in a hospital in Loire, in Orleans, called Sacred Heart. His voice became weak and sounded distressed, and it is not known whether Randy survived the war. Unfortunately, service records of whether a Randolph Nelson had ever served were destroyed in a fire in 1973 in St. Louis, where they were housed. Frances was brought forward 5 years and was asked what her name was, and in a childish, perky voice said Frances. It appears that Francis Isaacson was born shortly after Randolph Nelson died. Joe Keaton then decided to take Frances back 20 years before the birth of Margaret Benson, but she did not respond to any of the questions, even after trying many languages. Eventually they tried Swedish, and her face lit up. They asked her the name of a village or town using a Swedish translator and replied Halmstad, and she lived in the country. Halmstad is a city in the province of Halland on the Swedish west coast. She said she lived on a farm with horses. They asked her name and she said Anna Karlsson. Her fluency in thought slowly improved as the conversation progressed. What is amazing about the last incarnation is that Francis Isaacson could not speak a word of Swedish. A 4-year-old boy in Adelaide, Australia, has told his parents that he used to be Britain's Princess Diana in his previous life. His parents laughed off the statement. It's one of those cute things kids say. But over time, they were shocked to find that his knowledge of the former Princess of Wales' life included facts that it would have been impossible for him to know. Billy Thompson was 2 years old when someone gave his British mother Lisa a Lady Di novelty greetings card. On seeing the card, Billy pointed at the image and exclaimed, "Look, it's me as a princess." The family had never discussed the life of the Princess of Wales, who had passed away 18 years before Billy was born. According to his father, TV presenter David Campbell, they also had zero Raw's paraphernalia in their home. The parents were accordingly mystified as to where Billy's comments came from. Billy started talking to his family about his 2 boys, and, when later asked, explained that he meant his sons, the British Princes William and Harry. Billy is the grandson of Australian-Scottish-born rock musician Jimmy Barnes, and, on meeting a Scottish friend of the family, started describing a castle he used to visit when he was Princess Diana. He accurately named it as Balmoral Castle and said that it had unicorns on its walls. The unicorn is Scotland's national animal, with 2 of the legendary creatures appearing on either side in its royal arms. Multiple images of unicorns adorn the facade and interior of Balmoral Castle. A further disturbing statement came from Billy when Lisa showed him another photograph of Princess Diana. He again claimed that it showed him as a princess, with the added comment, "Then one day the sirens came, and I wasn't a princess anymore." His parents were chilled to hear that their son appeared to have some memory of the princess's fatal car accident in Paris in 1997. But the strangest and most unexplained part of Billy's account was his mention of a brother called John. Initially, his parents felt relieved. Princess Di's brother was named Charles, and they felt that there was no way she had a brother John. They decided, however, to check her family history online, and were astonished to find that a baby brother who had been named John had been born to her parents. Sadly, he passed just hours after birth, and a full year before Diana was born. Folkloric accounts of reincarnation abound in every country of the world and are said to predate the advent of the major religions. A common theme seems to be that children experience memories of past lives from about the age of 2, but by 8 years of age they have faded. Another is that souls often reincarnate within the same culture. Billy's parents seem to have rightly not asked him too many questions about his memories, some of which are probably traumatic. Shanti Devi, who is much publicised reincarnated soul, has commented that the memories can also raise strong desires to reunite with lost loved ones. And she said, "I do not want to open that closed door again."